I believe my arrival was expected, unless you enjoy wasting my time.
She did it in front of his colleagues. That was the detail no one forgot. Amara had driven to the gate of the Meridian Group corporate headquarters on a Thursday evening, not because she needed anything urgently, but because she wanted to be seen arriving in a car that was not her husband's. The Prado belonged to a man named Tobena, whose number she had saved in her phone under a woman's name. She rolled down the window at the security checkpoint, and when Chinedu's senior officer came to the glass, she said, loud enough for the 3 guards behind the barrier to hear, "Tell my husband to stop waiting up. He is embarrassing himself." Then she drove away, and the men at the post stood for a moment in the particular silence that follows a public wound. But what Amara did not know was that the man she had just humiliated in front of his colleagues was the reason those colleagues had jobs. Wherever you are watching from right now, whether it is Australia, Norway, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, I want you to stay close to this story, because what happens here has happened in a house near yours. The cruelty of it, yes, but also the patience. The quiet, deliberate patience of a man who understood something about time that his wife had stopped believing in. This is a story about what we miss when we only look at what a person is holding and never at what they are building. Stay with me. Onitsha sits at the edge of the Niger like a man who has long since stopped being afraid of water. The main market there, the Ose market, which runs so long that a child who enters at one end may be 17 before they find the other, is the true architecture of the city. Onitsha people say the market has a memory. It remembers who paid what for what. It remembers who defaulted and who kept their word. The thing the people of Onitsha protect above all else is their credit. Not money, not even land, but their record of their character across transactions. A man's reputation in the Ose market could open a warehouse or close a shipping line, and everyone understood this without being taught it. Chinedu Aze grew up watching his father negotiate in the market with the patience of a man who knew the other person would eventually need what he had. He carried that patience into every room he entered for the rest of his life. He was not a large man in any physical sense. He was the kind of person who arrived exactly on time, who held doors for people who did not notice, who remembered the names of children he had met only once. When he was 26, he began night security at the Meridian Group's headquarters on Uzbamba Mbadime. The salary was modest. He told no one he had any connection to the company beyond his uniform. Every morning after his shift, Chinedu ate ofe emonogbu with 1 piece of stockfish, always the same, always prepared the night before in a flask that he had learned to seal properly so it stayed warm until 6. It was the habit of a man who understood what it meant to account for himself. He kept a ledger, not electronic, a physical book, blue cover, bought from a stall in the Ose market, in which he recorded every naira he spent and every naira he invested. The entries were small at first, then they were less small. Amara had married him at 24, when the ledger was still mostly aspirational. She had admired his steadiness then. She had called it strength. By the time she was 31, she had decided to call it complacency instead. The renaming happened gradually, assisted by a smartphone and an Instagram feed full of women whose husbands drove G-Wagons to church. She did not examine where those men's money came from or what it cost. She only saw the arrival. The person she trusted with her frustrations was her friend Ngozi, who worked at a telecom company and who had a way of validating whatever Amara said without adding anything that might complicate it. A man with ambition would not still be wearing that uniform at 35, Ngozi said once, and Amara wrote it down somewhere in herself and used it later in arguments with Chinedu that he would not win because he would not compete. He would simply wait for the argument to finish and then ask if she wanted water. And she found this composure so infuriating that she interpreted it as indifference. She was wrong about that, but she had stopped wanting to be right about Chinedu. The first harm she caused him was private, which made it, in some ways, the most lasting. She called his mother in Onitsha, not to check in, to report. She described Chinedu's career in the language of failure, with a careful selection of true facts that produces a false picture. She said he had not been promoted in 4 years. She said his colleagues were younger than him and already earning more. She said she was trying to encourage him, but he seemed resistant to growth. His mother, Mama Chinedu, a woman who had sold fabric in the Ose market for 40 years and who understood money like a surgeon understands the body, listened without interrupting. When she finished, Mama Chinedu said, "Nuam, the yam that takes long to boil does not become cassava." And then she said she had to attend to a customer and ended the call. Amara sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment. She had expected sympathy. She had expected to be told she was suffering. The response had felt like a small, sealed door. What she did not register was that the call had been made from the main line, not her mobile, and Chinedu had come home early that day, and the main line had a second receiver in the study. He had heard her. He did not bring it up. He brought water, and he asked how her day had been, and his voice was the same voice it always was. But that night, he opened the blue ledger and looked at the numbers for a long time, and then he closed it, and his jaw was a different shape than it usually was. Not angry exactly, but resolved, as if something that had been a question had just been answered. The second trial was built on an audience. Amara's social media following had grown to something meaningful, not celebrity meaningful, but community meaningful in Lagos. She posted about her life with a particular aesthetic that made the ordinary look aspirational. Tablecloths folded a certain way, food plated with the kind of precision that suggested leisure, captions that were either aspirational or bitingly funny, depending on the day. She had never posted about Chinedu directly. She had, however, posted about the life she deserved and the kind of man who could provide it. Posts that functioned as coded absence, visible to anyone who knew the interior of her marriage. In November of that year, a Sunday afternoon post changed things. She had taken a photo at Tobuna's Ikoyi apartment. She told herself it was innocent, that they were just friends, that he was showing her a view. But she had cropped him out of the picture, but not carefully enough. The shadow in the bottom right corner had a shape. A man in a particular leather chair. Distinctive, the kind of chair that costs enough to be notable. An account she did not recognize had replied with a screenshot of that chair inside a tagged photo at a well-known address. The comment read only, "Interesting interior design choice." It was gone within 20 minutes. She deleted it. But in Lagos, 20 minutes is a generation. 3 people had screenshotted it. Within 48 hours, Chinedu's older brother, Kelechi, had seen it. He called Amara's phone, not Chinedu's. The call lasted 4 minutes. Amara spoke 14 words in those 4 minutes, and they were not enough. Kelechi did not call Chinedu immediately. He held the information for 2 days, turning it the way the market elders turned a disputed transaction, examining each edge. Then he called his brother and asked him to come for rice and ofe. Chinedu arrived at Kelechi's compound in Surulere on a Saturday, sat down, ate, and then his brother placed a phone on the table between them and played him a voice note. The voice was Amara's, talking to Ngozi about Tobuna. Not explicitly, but specifically enough. Her laugh was a specific kind, the kind that is different when the laughter is about something being hidden. Chinedu sat for a moment after the voice note ended. He picked up his water glass and drank from it. He said, "Thank you for the food. The ofe was good." Kelechi watched him. "Is that all you want to say?" "That is all I am saying today." Chinedu meant it. Oji bun du. The kola nut is life. In Onitsha, this was not philosophy, it was protocol. At Kelechi's compound, the kola was presented before anything difficult was discussed, and it was this that Chinedu remembered sitting in his car afterward, that the ceremony existed, that the form had been honored, that something had been offered properly before the wound. He was grateful for that. He drove back to the Lekki apartment he shared with Amara without expression. He parked. He sat for 3 minutes in the car. Then he went inside, and she was watching something on the television, and he greeted her, and she responded without looking up. The crack in their house had always been there, but now it had a sound. The ally existed in a part of the story that Amara did not know was a part of the story at all. His name was Obi Ageli. Everyone called him Obi. He was the Meridian Group's head of internal audit. He had been with the company for 9 years and had known Chinedu's Eze as majority shareholder for 6 of those years, bound by a confidentiality structure that Chinedu himself had designed. Obi was a careful man, precise in the way that accountants who work near large secrets tend to become precise. He did not drink at company events. He did not speak about his work at home. He had kept Chinedu's secret as an act of professional honor and had never examined it beyond that, until the Thursday in December when he saw the Instagram post. He did not follow Amara. A colleague had shown him, laughing at the way people share these things, casually, without understanding the weight. Eze's wifo, the colleague said, swiping past, already moving on. Obi kept his face still, but he looked at the screenshot longer than the colleague stayed. He carried it for a week. He prayed about it, genuinely, on his knees, the way he had been taught. He called his wife and told him something general about a difficult decision, and she told him, without knowing the details, that a man who keeps another man's secret long after the secret has become a weapon is not honoring a contract anymore. He turned this until it became clear. He called Chinedu on a Saturday morning. He did not explain on the phone. He asked to meet. Chinedu said the Born Vita Cafe in Victoria Island, 2 o'clock. They sat in the corner. Obi placed his own phone on the table and played him 3 things: the screenshot, a voice recording from a board meeting in which an associate had mentioned Amara's Lego circles in the context of company exposure, and a financial document that had nothing to do with Amara at all, but everything to do with the timing of what was about to become public. The London contract announcement is in 6 weeks. Everything will be visible after that. Chinedu nodded. He looked at the wall to the left of the table. You are telling me this why? Because, Obi said. And he stopped, and he chose his next words the way the market people chose their weights. Because you should decide what is in your house before the whole street comes to look. Chinedu paid for both coffees. He did not thank Obi with words. He simply held his gaze for a moment before he stood, and Obi understood that what had passed between them was complete. If this story is sitting in your chest the way it is sitting in mine, if the part where Obi made that call feels like something you've been waiting for someone in your life to do, then you already know why some stories have to be told to the end. There are people in this world who hold the weight of what is right long after it stops being convenient. Stay with us, because what comes next is the part that changes everything. What came next arrived in the form of a broadcast. Tobina Akaize had been visible in Lagos for 3 years, visible in the way that men who are very good at the performance of prosperity are visible. He drove a white Range Rover autography with a Lagos plates that cost enough to suggest certainty. He spoke about his portfolio in the language of a man who has read business articles carefully and practiced the vocabulary in a mirror. He wore his watches on the outside of his cuffs. He had told Amara he was in strategic consulting and real estate development. He had not told her that the strategic consulting was 2 dormant companies registered to addresses that did not exist, and the real estate development was a commission arrangement on properties he did not own for sales he had not yet made. What happened in January did not happen quietly. A cooperative of investors who had given Tobena money for a property development in Abuja, 14 of them, most of them professionals who had done their due diligence on paper and not in person, filed a complaint with the Economic and Financial Commission. The investigation that followed produced documents and a court date and a publication in a financial newspaper that covered Lagos business. Tobena's name was in the 3rd paragraph. Amara read it at 7 in the morning at the kitchen table, and she read it 3 times. And each time she finished it, she sat very still for a moment before starting again, as if the paragraph might say something different on the second reading and the third. It did not. Amara called Tobena's number. It rang 7 times. She called from Ngozi's number. It rang again. Later that week, a mutual contact told her quietly, without pleasure, that Tobena had traveled. When Amara asked where, the contact looked at her with the particular expression of someone who is deciding how much kindness is owed, and said, "I think he has gone to sort some things out." He had not gone to sort some things out. He had gone somewhere that people go when Lagos becomes too specific a city for their particular situation. Amara sat inside the collapse of everything she had been constructing in her mind for 2 years. The image she had been building, of herself arriving into a better life, of the upgrade she deserved, of the kind of man who could provide it. She sat inside its absence, and it was enormous. The apartment in Lekki where she lived with Chinedu felt different that morning. The furniture looked the way furniture looks when you have been away and returned, familiar, but revised. She thought about going to Ngozi. She started a message 3 times and deleted it each time because she understood, sitting at that kitchen table, that Ngozi had never offered her anything except reflection, and what she needed now was not a mirror. Chinedu had already started the process that Obi had advised. Quietly, through a solicitor in Victoria Island named Mrs. Adeyemi, he had filed the papers. He had not needed to make a scene about it. The papers arrived on a Wednesday through a process server, politely, with a cover letter that Mrs. Adeyemi had written in the careful language of someone who had done this many times and understood that language, when used precisely, could be merciful. Amara held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. When she opened it and read it, she sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because she could not stand, she chose it. She sat on the kitchen tiles, cool, clean, the kind she had picked from a catalog with great care when they had moved in, and she read the papers twice, and she felt the full weight of the years she had spent wanting something other than what she had. Onye watara oji watara ndu, he who brings kola brings life. In Onitsha, what a man carries into a space determines the quality of what is possible there. Chinedu had carried himself into their marriage with everything he had, his patience, his ledger, his stockfish and flask, his absolute refusal to perform wealth he had not yet deployed. He had carried life in. She had spent 2 years telling him it was not enough. Now she sat on the floor, and the cola was gone, and what was left was the question of what she had brought. The board meeting of the Meridian Group's public announcement was held at the Echo Hotel in Victoria Island on a Wednesday. The announcement concerned the completion of a logistics infrastructure partnership with a European consortium that made Meridian the largest privately held logistics operator in West Africa. The chairman of the board was to give a statement before the press briefing. The room held 61 people. Board members, senior executives, journalists from 3 business publications, and 2 television crews. The chairman of the board was Chinedu Eze. He walked into that room in a dark suit that was made for him in Onitsha by a tailor who had made suits for his father. He carried nothing with him, no folder, no notebook, no phone. He sat at the head of the table and looked at the room with the same eyes that had looked at the guards at Gate C every morning for 8 years. And no one in that room would have been able to say with certainty that anything about him had changed. He was still exactly the man he had always been. He spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke about logistics as infrastructure for dignity, about what it meant for a country to move its own goods on its own terms. He spoke about the people in his workforce from the gate to the boardroom, using the phrase "from the gate" twice without explaining it, and the 2 journalists who had done their background research understood why, and they wrote it down. He did not speak about his personal life. He did not perform anything. He simply described what had been built and what would be built next. And the room was quiet in the way that rooms become quiet when they understand they are hearing something true. The video was on YouTube within 4 hours. By the following morning, it had been viewed by enough people that Amara's phone was making sounds it did not usually make. The first message she received was from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, then Ngozi, then an aunt, then a woman from her church whose message was not unkind, but her tone carried within it something harder than sympathy, a kind of communal ledgering. By evening, there were 47 messages, and she had responded to none of them. In the foyer outside the Echo Hotel conference room, after the cameras had left, Obi stood near the window with a glass of water. A board member from the north, a woman with gray braids and the stillness of someone who had been in many rooms like this, caught his eye across the room and held it for a moment. She did not know what Obi had done. She simply looked at him the way people sometimes look at each other when they understand, without language, that something cost something. He nodded slightly. She looked away. She looked away. A junior journalist near the door had stopped writing. He was still holding his pen, but his pad was at his side, and he was watching Chinedu shake hands with a European executive with an expression on his face that was not quite professional, the expression of someone who was recalibrating something personal, some private assumption about what a man could be. A woman from the catering staff, passing with a tray of glasses, paused beside the doorframe for 2 seconds longer than her job required. Just 2 seconds. Then she moved on. The room saw what it saw. Lagos would process it for years. Chinedu moved out of the Lekki apartment within a month of the papers being served. He did not take more than what was his. He left the catalog tiles, the curtains she had chosen, the kitchen equipment she had organized. He took his blue ledger and his flask and his father's agbada that hung in the back of the wardrobe, and the few books he kept by the bed. He moved into a house in Ikoyi that he owned for 3 years under a holding company and that Amara had never known about. It was not a dramatic house. It was quiet and ordered and had a garden that got good light. His days changed in only one visible way. He began leaving the office by 5. He had spent too many years available to work at all hours and not available to anything else. He corrected this without announcement. The woman named Nkem had been his classmate at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. She had written her final year thesis on supply chain efficiency in agricultural markets and argued in front of an unimpressed panel that logistics was the infrastructure of sovereignty. Chinedu had read it at the time and never forgotten the phrase. He had looked her up 3 years ago, professionally, and they had 2 conversations about the Meridian model that were among the most useful conversations he had had that year. He had not pursued it further. After the settlement was complete and the quiet returned to his life, he called her, not with intent stated, just to say he had been thinking about the thesis and that time had proved her right. She laughed, a specific laugh, the one that meant she was genuinely surprised, and she said she had been following what Meridian was building and had a question she had wanted to ask for 2 years. He told her to ask it. She did. He answered honestly. They talked for 90 minutes. What grew between them was not fast or performed. It was the kind of thing that grows in the space left by everything that has been removed, slowly, toward light, without being forced. Ife, onye matara ya, what a person has done follows them. This is the last proverb in this story, and it holds in both directions. What Chinedu had done, the discipline, the patience, the refusal to become small, even when his wife needed him to be smaller than he was, followed him into his new life and made it possible. What Amara had done followed her also, not as punishment from outside, as consequence from within. She had not lost a wealthy man. She had lost the version of herself that knew how to see a man clearly. That was the thing that required rebuilding, and it was harder than any other kind of construction. Nkem sat across from Chinedu at a restaurant in Ikoyi on a Tuesday evening, and he was talking about the next phase of the logistics network, and she was disagreeing with one element of his distribution model, and he was listening, genuinely, with his full attention, leaning slightly forward, and there was nothing performed about either of them. They were simply 2 people who had studied the same problem from different angles for a long time and had finally sat at the same table. He poured water into her glass without being asked. If this story has stayed in your chest, if the moment Obi made that phone call to Chinedu moved something in you, or if the image of Amara sitting on the kitchen floor when the messages came in made you feel something you were still sorting out, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were Obi? What would you have risked to tell the truth? Tell me in the comments, because I think how a person answers that question says more about them than they expect. And if you are watching from somewhere where stories like this one feel uncomfortably close to home, stay with us. The next one is already waiting.